Marion Davis, One Parent Families Scotland. Westminster Government and the Scottish Government are both tasked by legislation to work towards eradicating child poverty. I wanted to ask the panel, child poverty is still at an unacceptable level, and not just families that are on benefit, also families who are in work. Half of all children who are in poverty have one parent that works. And I wondered what the panel thought with regard to whether the new welfare reform proposals would contribute towards eradicating child poverty.
We'll start with you, Damien, because
it's a really good question, and I guess we're going to find out to some degree, because there may be conflicts in clearly the welfare policies that are about to be played out and the child poverty policies. And I think it's likely to be in the margins. And often minority law is poor law, and as you progress with a major programme, it's the 20% that you haven't thought through that creates the biggest negative impact. So I think there's better people on the panel to explain how they've thought through how the very specific minority groups, but very important groups who would be exposed to a benefits trap, in effect, are being addressed by the programmes that are being advanced.
Thanks, Damien. Ingeus and working links, can you reflect on how you think your delivery in Scotland, in broad terms, is likely to impact on child poverty?
Well, I think. Well, I think clearly the work programme and what our working links and Ingeus are about to embarking on now will be significant in terms of how that can impact on child poverty. I think, however, the issue for many households, actually, even whilst in work, is that there is still poverty. And whilst we can do a lot to help people move into work, there's still further to be done to ensure that people can move out of that poverty trap whilst in employment. So I think for us, we'll get them to a stage, but then we need to make sure that we upskill them, trying to progress their career, to ensure that actually they can move, whether they're a single parent family or not, or whether they're a low income family, that we move them further out of poverty.
Is there anything in the work programme you reckon that makes it more likely that this particular national government programme to tackle work will more of an impact on child poverty than previous programmes?
I think things, obviously, they changed to lone parents in terms of their move from income support to GSA has been significant, and obviously now lone parents whose child is over 5 must now look for employment. I think that has a big impact. Some would argue negative impact in terms of what that means to them, but the whole view is to try and move them into employment, which then therefore makes that child's life, preferably better. I think the introduction of universal credits will, I hope, as I say, make the whole issue for people in employment or out of employment and child poverty better. And I think that we'll wait and see on how that works out.
I think the work programme is potentially part of the solution. I think it's a programme that is about getting people into work, but it really is a programme that is about keeping people in work and keeping people in work for the long term. And I think to do that well and to do that in a sensible manner, that is really about making sure that people are ready to move into work and that the job match and the job fit is the right job. And that's largely about making work relevant, but also making work pay. So I think in order for the work programme to be successful, it probably has to be better than previous programmes at moving people into work that's right for them in the long term. We obviously will have partway through the lifespan of the work programme and move away from the in-works tax credit system towards universal credit, which I think is inherently a strong idea, but there are lots of aspects of it that still need to be worked out. There are lots of issues that have been flagged up in the last couple of weeks as it's been through Parliament that really need to be bottomed out in order for it to be successful. And I suppose a final point, is that poverty is relative measure. And one of the issues we have at the moment, obviously, is that the cost of living is increasing at such a kind of drastic rate, particularly things like fuel, and the impact that has on people who are being brought into the kind of the fuel poverty trap that might not have been there 3 and 4 years ago. And that's an issue that's probably quite well beyond the scope of one single government policy, but nonetheless it's a really important issue that we need to try and find a way of addressing and dealing with.
I don't think the work programme will make any difference at all, frankly, to it. I think there's a much bigger picture here, Allan. If we look at, the legislation itself, I mean, we're certainly working with Scottish Government and organisations in the sector to try and assess the impact, and it's actually quite difficult, as kind of Paul alluded to, at this time. But part of the issue here is about the powers of the Scottish Parliament and what Scottish Government can do. Because actually, we've been calling for the devolution of welfare work programmes, employability programmes from DWP to Scotland. We've not taken the next step, and it's probably the next one I'm going actually saying, what about benefits, what about everything else in terms of house? And that's where it is, because UK Government are currently spending something like £16 billion in Scotland that it's related to dealing with poverty and unemployment, but it's not matching as effectively as it should with what the Scottish Government is doing. And I'd personally rather see the Scottish Government in control of all of that and developing programmes that work for Scotland and actually join everything up. So the point we should be saying here is, what is a bigger picture solution? I recognise next year, probably on balance, this is going to affect adversely, child poverty rather than actually help it. Yeah.
Etta, you have you? Heard what was being said about devolving the Jobcentre, but at the moment there's no plans whatsoever to devolve Jobcentre Plus to Scotland, and I think a lot of it's tied in with the complications of bringing in the universal credit, and that's, I think, a big issue. So, but I think the thing that I would say here is that in Scotland we have a stronger partnership agenda in Scotland than we have anywhere else in the UK. When I go to meetings at a national level, clearly what we do in partnership in Scotland as far as employability is concerned and helping with child poverty and with the social agenda is far superior to what I see in many other regions across the country.
Now I'm going to be more in Scotland on Carillion energy services, but I think one of the issues about the potential for the work programme and the need for organisations represented here to keep people into work on a longer term basis should give the potential to work with employers who put a proper training plan in place, who look to upskill people at every stage rather than just simply getting somebody to fill a post and then kind of walk away from it. So I think there's the collaboration between employers and Jobcentre Plus and delivery providers must be better, and therefore it must increase the prospects of people getting better and higher skills and better jobs as a result. But it's all potential once again, because the pursuance of the relatively small amounts of money in the work programme has made that extremely difficult, I think, to come to pass.
What about college? How do you from a college perspective? In terms of the child poverty agenda specifically?
Well, I mean, a couple of very obvious points. I mean, things like welfare to work, it assumes expanding employment of the type that these people can move into, and I think that's a big assumption. I think from a skills point of view, it assumes that there is the capacity to deliver these skills at the right level and into the communities involved, and that's where colleges have been very, very strong in recent years. And the colleges were asked to implement cuts of 10.4% across the board, and at the same time not reducing the number of students it put through. So what actually happened was that the high value schemes around the margin, which were mainly aimed at deprived areas, were the ones that got cut. So whatever investments coming from Westminster inspired initiatives is, I would suspect, more than offset by what the colleges have just lost. So I think that, and also the skills and the goodwill that's been engendered over many, many years in terms of outreach. And I know from my college, we've cut back from over 100 outreach centres working in, the most deprived wards in Scotland down to a couple of handfuls, and we're in discussion about whether we can keep those now. So I think that there is a real issue about where the money's going and where the best value is going to come from.
Can I just hang on? I'll take another question.
Kate Still from the WISE Group. We know there are challenges, that there have been cuts, but given that skills policy is devolved and welfare policy is UK government, what can we do? What do the panel think we can actually do in meeting those challenges to join up skills and employability to have the sustainable jobs that creates the wealth longer term?
Yeah, I think this is where we get practical, Kate. You know, the politics of it will take a time to sort itself out, and I think other panellists have hinted that there's Scotland's a small place, so there's a lot more partnership work on the go. So I can cite a couple of examples which give us cause for hope. And I think Jobcentre Plus should be differentiated from DWP. DWP is pretty much chucking it over Hadrian's Wall, whereas Jobcentre Plus is much more engaged on the ground and active. So the contracting process from DWP is very different to the direct engagement with Jobcentre Plus. So, for example, in the last 2 years, I think the amount of engagement between Skills Development Scotland and Jobcentre Plus has never been better. We work around a programme called the Integration of Employment and Skills, which is effectively what you're talking about, Kate. 700 of our joint staff went through a development and training programme to enhance our understanding of what each other is doing and where the fit is and how we ensure that we get value add for all of the scarce resources that we have. In addition, the local employment partnerships are working very well. And then lastly, I'll point to a piece of work that we're involved in, which is effectively trying to ensure that our programs are heavily anchored at the regional and local authority level. So we now have service delivery agreements with all 32 local authorities. And the outcome of that process has been, for the first year ever, under the commissioning process for Get Ready for Work and Training for Work, we effectively now commission that through an advisory group which is made up of local authority representatives and CPP representatives. The contracting process is fully aligned against the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, the latest statistics on school leaver destination reports, and what's required in local geographies. And I think that model offers us hope for a national commissioning process, but a local contracting process. And what I'd like to see, and it's certainly evidence that I gave to the Christie Commission, is that all available funds in the employability space are put on the table and are contracted locally through a single strategic skills pipeline in each local authority area, or on a regional basis if that's possible. And so from a Skills Development Scotland point of view, we'd be happy to put our money on the table. There's a lot of discretionary spend that local authorities spend. They're quite happy to put their money on the table. DWP should put their money on the table, and that money should be commissioned and integrated so that we get a single pipeline, and it reflects the needs of local economies, which are very different to the national perspectives that are given. So if you'd asked me that question about 3 or 4 years ago, I would have been incredibly pessimistic. I think there's a real appetite amongst everybody to do the right thing. I've never known a time when people are really working to achieve the best rather than to protect their own patch or to protect turf or promote turf wars. But I do think there's some big questions that need to be asked about, you know, the chunks of money that are going around and are not properly aligned.